to really fundraise with integrity and communicate with integrity is your core message actually has to be the same. And really being clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So we really anchored our messaging that, hey, we knew this was going to happen. We planned for it. I brought up the financials and talked people through how we had increased reserves and made some really strategic decisions to position ourselves for that.
Welcome to Nonprofits Now, Leading Today, a new podcast that gives nonprofit leaders a playbook to tackle today's most pressing leadership challenges. Myal Greene, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Well, Stacy, it's fantastic. I'm really glad to be joining you today and to have this conversation.
Your organization receives significant federal funding, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, because you, like a lot of other organizations, have had a lot of jolts, and now we have the possibility of economic recession and other kinds of challenges. And you were one of the people who was smart enough to really think about this ahead of time. Before the election, your organization came up with two different budgets, projecting what you thought might happen, and making sure that you were really prepared. Can you walk us through why you decided to do two budgets and what they looked like?
Right. So World Relief, we are one of 10 refugee resettlement agencies in the United States. And we knew, based on the experience of the first Trump administration, that it was a very adverse time for organizations involved in refugee resettlement, in particular because one of the major refugee resettlement program has federal funding attached to it and is tied to a pipeline of refugees that the government sends. We saw significant reductions the first time round, and we knew going into this election that we need to be prepared for any particular outcome. And so we built out what we referred to as our adverse budget and our steady state budget, and we leaned into both of those. We leaned into having two distinct strategies, both with very similar end goals and things that we wanted to achieve, but different tactics with which we would achieve that and processes that we would do it. And so really going back 12 to 18 months before the election, we had a very clear picture of financial modeling, and we could adjust different factors from the scale of the refugee resettlement program, even to our private fundraising projections and those factors, and use that to model and prepare for really two different outcomes based on that election.
And what difference did it make? Were you as prepared as you could be? Did you feel good that scenario planning really made a difference? Would you recommend that to others?
Absolutely. And, in some ways, we began the days right after the November election results were announced. We were able to really implement some very immediate decisions and take steps forward, not just from a financial or budgetary perspective, but just operationally, and knew what we were going to do and knew how we were going to react. And so that was very helpful. Obviously, since President Trump has taken office, there's been some challenges that we faced that were more significant than we expected, some things that came about faster than we expected. But by and large, we were well prepared and had a good understanding of what was going to take place.
What were some of the most significant things that you had to do right away and perhaps faster than you expected?
Right. So, immediately we moved into adjusting costs. And a big piece of that was payroll. And so we needed to adjust payroll and really recognize that individuals who were working on grants that were ending or effectively ended or paused were not going to have a job. And that was a very unfortunate reality that we not only had to stop the work and to stop working with our clients and beneficiaries that are so valuable to our work, but we also had to implement some staffing changes and staffing reductions. But we knew what those impacts were going to be early. And really, we were actually able, before the election, to do some communication and sharing with people who were on those projects that, in essence, that there could certainly be some changes happening depending on the outcome of the election. And so, I think what it allowed us to do is have the workforce well prepared. It had us to help the communities that we work with be well prepared as well.
That's so important that people had as much time as possible, because I think at a lot of other nonprofit organizations, they were really pretty shocked. Obviously, federal funds make a big difference to your organization, but you also rely on private donations. How did you communicate to donors that this was happening, and how did you talk to them about what kinds of things they could do to make a difference?
The announcement of the suspension of the refugee resettlement program happened on Inauguration Day. And then 4 days later, on January 24th, it was announced that there would be immediate suspension of funding to the agencies that were welcoming refugees. And so that created an immediate challenge for us, that we had clients that we had already welcomed that we had financial obligations to them. And so we immediately went to the churches, the private donors, community members, volunteers who work with us and work with the refugees and other immigrants that we welcome. And we said, there's an immediate, clear need, and there's urgency associated with that. And so that really helped us. We launched a campaign called Standing in the Gap, and it was really a record-breaking moment for the organization in terms of the speed with which we were mobilizing private resources. And I think really what made a difference is we communicated very clearly to the donor community and our partners what the need was. There was urgency attached to that because we had people who were here in this country, and the federal funding to support them was cut off. And we had the opportunity where we could really communicate the exact benefits that they would provide by providing financial support, and saw great success with it. We raised over $10 million in 2 months, and that really helped to meet some of the immediate shortfalls that so many of our clients were facing.
That's extraordinary. Did you consider whether it was the right thing to do to go so fast on a private campaign, or was it a no-brainer to say, yes, we have to go ahead and do this?
We absolutely just felt the need to go forward quickly. And we knew that the situation was going to be bad and get worse. But we didn't expect in 4 days that this would be the action that would take it. And so our team stood up, they stepped in, they worked over the weekend. We got out our first fundraising emails on Saturday after the announcement had gone out Friday afternoon, and really began to work on it very quickly. And I think actually it was that intentionality to be rapid in our response that helped us get a good start to the campaign. And then over the weeks that followed, we really dialed in and got offered more specifics as we knew those specifics. And I think those partners who were looking for more information, more details, got those and engaged at that time.
That's just an incredible outpouring of generosity, which must have lifted the staff as well as the people you serve. So congratulations on that. Unfortunately, there are more challenges ahead. The tariffs, inflation, the overall economy, the possibility there's going to be a global recession is right in front of us. And I'm curious, how are you planning for that? How will it affect your organization, and what kinds of plans do you have in place for dealing with a really slow or perhaps pretty bad economy?
Immediate impacts in the economy have different effects on different timelines for different kinds of major donors and givers, and some that give, straight and immediately out of proceeds for business. We've had conversations with some where they said, hey, can you be praying for us? Our business isn't doing well in this season, and we're not going to be able to be giving to you the way that we normally do, and we're immediately feeling the impacts. Other organizations and foundations that are giving out of proceeds from the previous calendar year, previous fiscal year, are still giving right now, but we anticipate we'll probably have a slowdown in the next fiscal year if the market ends up low. And so one thing that we always do every year is we build in a contingency to our budget that's around 10% of our private revenue, just in the event that there is a miss or a miscalculation on how we've set our expectations and our forecasts for private revenue for the year. And that helps take a little bit of the pressure off. And then if we get through the fiscal year and we see that we're doing well, we might adjust that and make sure that we're deploying more resources to our programs. But what we don't want to do is end up in a place where we overcommit too early and find ourselves in a financial situation down the road.
You've had tremendous success in fundraising, but what do you think needs to be communicated about the fact that there's just no way private donations make up for all that the government provided?
The reality is, because these needs have been met by a specific government program, there's not a pipeline of donors, of foundations that have put this on their radar screen and engaged. And so I think that that's something that we have to be very cognizant of here, that what does it mean to communicate and educate to individuals in philanthropy, individuals in some larger giving, that, hey, there's some really significant needs that you didn't need to address and didn't need to think about because the government had these programs and was taking care of them in the process. And so I don't think it's realistic to say that we're going to come out here and replace tens of millions of dollars overnight with private contributions. Even though we ran a very successful campaign, I think part of that was related to the urgency, related to the very specific injustice, and seeing people mistreated, how that raised feelings of compassion. And so that really is where we saw the outpouring of support in this season. Was a lot of individuals. We brought in a lot of new donors and partners that had never worked with us before, given money to us, and that really spurred us on in this season. And so I don't think it is a quick replacement that happens overnight, but hopefully it's engaging people in a conversation and inviting them into this work long term that can build some replacement for these services which are so vital.
As you think about the fundraising messages that work, do you think a little bit differently about how you appeal to grant makers, to wealthy donors, to individuals, to congregations? What are some of the different messages that you use for each of those kinds of supporters?
To really fundraise with integrity and communicate with integrity is your core message actually has to be the same. And really being clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, your motivations for that, and how you do that. But recognize that different donors have different things they care about more, points of attention that they have. And so with some of these larger wealthy individuals or foundations, they see an organization losing tens of millions of dollars in revenue and have a lot of questions about solvency and if you're going to be able to continue. And they don't want to just make their donation to you be something that's helping you close out your organization well. They want to know that you've got a vision to go forward, that this is planned for. And so we really anchored our messaging that, hey, we knew this was going to happen. We planned for it. I brought up the financials and talked people through how we had increased reserves and made some really strategic decisions to position ourselves for that. For our churches, when we communicate with them, we're clearly integrating much more faith into the messaging, giving church leaders resources that they can use to explain this effort to their congregation, why they're recommending that the church make these gifts and things like that. And then with individual donors or digital giving, one of the most crucial things is how do you distill that very complicated message of, well, the government was funding this grant, the funding is no longer there, these are the individuals that are affected, and this is how we're going to help them, and then this is how you can make a difference. And to put all of that into an email or a soundbite or a Google ad is really, really hard. And so just to do that well and be anchored in one consistent message is a really valuable thing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm curious where you're getting your best advice. Are you turning to your board members, to your staff, your executive team?
Our board has been fantastic in giving us advice, and we've got a very strong and well-functioning finance committee that's really walking with us in these matters, giving us some sound advice, really holding us accountable on the governance side of things, looking at cash flows, looking at income projections, but also helping us keep strategy in mind, which is really crucial, that we're making sure we're committing to our strategic goals, not just playing things safe financially. One thing with the board is we walk this journey of the adverse budgets and the adverse scenario planning with them for the better part of 2 years. And so they were locked in, ready to go, really understood the challenges we were facing and the implications.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about how you communicate with your staff, given how panicky they're seeing all of this stuff in the news? They know what's happening. As you mentioned, in the first Trump administration, some of these things happen. Are there any lessons that you've learned about how best to share information?
Yeah, the advice I gave to our management team very early on was lean into radical transparency in this season. And so everybody's going to be having a bunch of questions. And the last thing we need is having 2,000 different opinions about what's really happening. And so how can we communicate consistently, regularly? How can we equip line managers or office leaders to be able to communicate that information with their teams? Now, I learned, with one email where I really laid out all the details of our financial constraints and some austerity measures we'd put in practice during the cash flow crunch. I got some feedback from some managers like, that was a little too much information. And so we need to kind of take some thoughtful, careful, and deliberate steps to make sure that staff know. And I think the other thing is communicating what we don't know. And so to say, hey, we think this grant you're working on is in jeopardy. It may not survive the current presidential administration, but we don't know yet. We haven't gotten word. We're going to keep working until then. And when we hear something more, we're going to tell you right away as soon as we know something. And I think that's helped people stay engaged. And we've not seen people resigning or leaving the organization early as a result and in this season. So that's been a very important thing as well.
That engenders so much trust. So thank you for that advice. in these incredibly anxious times, it's hard for leaders to get through them all. So I'll close with our standing last question. What is it that you do to recharge?
Yeah, I think taking time away from the day-to-day work and having good breaks throughout the day are really, really foundational. And so I really make sure that when I, hang up things for the day, that I spend time with my family, have those breaks. Every morning I begin that time in reading my Bible and prayer, and I think that that's a really crucial way to start the day, be centered, have my anchoring, and know where my motivation comes from in the work, and know that that's deeply tied to my faith, and be renewed in that.
Thank you so much for all of this information and insight. You gave us lots of advice that other leaders can use in this turbulent time. I wish you and your organization well. Thank you so much for this conversation, and goodbye.